Hello everybody and welcome to this new Doctor Who video. Unbeknownst to most of my audience, in the last couple months I've been embarking on a full Doctor Who marathon in which I watch every single Doctor Who story, starting with the first Doctor's Unearthly Child and working my way up through the classic series, the new series, up to the end of Ncuti's run and beyond, hopefully. And in this marathon, I have now passed all of the first Doctor's era and I'm now on episode 2 of the Highlanders, which means the first Doctor's era is very fresh in my mind and I feel like now is the best time to rank every single one of the first Doctor's stories from my least favourite to my most favourite in this tier list that you're looking at right now. Right, with all that jibber jabber out of the way, let's start at the very beginning with An Unearthly Child. Where is this placing on the tier list? Let's find out right now. Quick disclaimer, this list will be mostly based on my own opinion on Doctor Who. There will be some objective analysation of all of the Doctor Who stories here, but there will be a definite bias towards some stories over others because we all have our own differing opinions at the end of the day. But with my film critique, filmmaker mindset, I will try and be as objective as possible when ranking these, but like I say, this is all based down to preference. But I digress. The first Doctor's An Unearthly Child we're going to rank in B, a high B. The most popular opinion of this story is that episode 1 is one of the best 25 minutes of television of all time, and then the other 3 episodes are poo. I am a minority in that I love the first one, absolutely to bits, but I also quite enjoy the other 3. The main criticism with this story as a whole is that it is a lot of running around in and out of the cave and hairy men shouting about fire. But what I really enjoy about it is that it's the very first. It is the most blatant fish out of water story of all time, but in like the best way, in a way where it does feel like the TARDIS team really could die here because they're so out of their depth compared to like the modern world that it does feel very new, and the stakes are quite high by default because they are in a place that they can't really navigate on their own merit, really. Also, like I say, it sets up the entire show. I think it's an absolutely genius way to introduce the entire Doctor Who franchise through this story because you are discovering the Doctor, his TARDIS, and all of his box of tricks through the eyes of the school teachers, Ian and Barbara, and I think it's the perfect way to do it because they are the surrogate eyes of the audience, discovering all this stuff for the first time, discovering the Doctor and the TARDIS, etc. And I just really appreciate how it was all presented to the audience via this story, which is why An Unearthly Child lands in B for me, or 1000 BC if you're a hipster. But yeah, it's a decent one, and like I say, you've got to start somewhere, and I think there are definitely worse stories in the Hartnell era than this one. I think this one does a damn fine job of setting everything up in a satisfying way. Next one we're going to talk about is the Daleks. Now, this one's going in A. For me, this one's going in A. It's nostalgic for me. It was one of the first stories I ever watched of Doctor Who. Unearthly Child 2, actually. Funny story. But I had the VHSs of An Unearthly Child and Doctor Who and the Daleks at a very early age. So I did watch these first Hartnell stories at a very early point in my life getting into Doctor Who. But the story's brilliant. The pacing is a bit whiffy at some points. Like, I don't think we need an entire 25 minutes of Ian and Barbara traversing the cave system to get to the Dalek city, frankly. I feel like the story definitely could have been trimmed down to a 6 or a 5-parter as opposed to its lengthy 7-part runtime, you know? The Doctor is straight up a bastard in this one. He actually sabotages the TARDIS because he wanted to explore the Dalek city, and that's what got them into that mess. And I feel like even though some people say it's very out of character for the Doctor, I think it's a really good way of setting up his character arc and him softening up to Ian and Barbara later in his era, where he becomes more soft and friendly and bubbly as opposed to the grouchy crotchety old man that he is in these earlier episodes. I like that the Thals are a peaceful race now, and it's a great contrast to the Daleks being so ruthless in this, and that does lead to the really cool ambush scene in the actual Dalek city. But the overall takeaway from this is the story is excellent, but a tiny bit bloated in areas, but definitely deserving of A tier because of the fact that it cemented Daleks as the pop culture icon that they still are today. And it's thanks to this story and them being ruthless, cunning, and just really captivating to watch. And like everyone knows, made kids jump behind the sofas at the time. But there we go, that was the Daleks. Right, now we move on to The Edge of Destruction, the third serial in Doctor Who Season 1. This one often gets overlooked. I'm going to stick it in A tier. And that might shock some people, and that's fine. It's short but sweet. And it's a self-contained little bottle episode set exclusively in the TARDIS. But that makes room for decent character development amongst the existing cast of, like I say, Ian, Barbara, Doctor and Susan. There's a fun little mystery going on, and there's great room for trust to build between the TARDIS team because tensions were quite high between Ian, Barbara and the Doctor, right? So this episode kind of fleshes out their characters and their relationships with each other, which for me, I love that shit. I love good character development, and that's what this has. And also, when it comes to episodes solely set on the TARDIS, this is among the best. But yeah, Edge of Destruction, in my opinion, is a sleeper hit. I think that it's sorely underrated. It's a fun, very digestible, short watch that you can get through really fast, and I think it's mostly very enjoyable. Next we have Marco Polo, which I don't have a physical copy of because it's missing from the BBC archives, unfortunately, which means I had to watch it on a Telesnap reconstruction, which does knock it down some points, but I still think it deserves a low A. It's one of the better pure historical stories of Doctor Who. Like I say, it's a crying shame that this one's sadly got deleted from the archives of Doctor Who back in the day. Because looking at all of the set photos and behind the scenes and telesnaps of the story itself, you see all of the really lush, extravagant sets that they'd made for this period piece, and the costumes as well. What the fuck? The audio doesn't do it justice, and that's pretty much all I had to base my opinion on this story off, because like I say, the story is missing. It literally does not exist anymore. Which is a crying shame, like I say. The synopsis of the TARDIS breaking down and stranding the TARDIS team is a really, really cool one, and obviously Doctor Who have done it a quadrillion times since this one, but this is the first time that sort of setup for a story happens, and I think it's quite fun that happened here. The plot line of Marco wanting to trade the TARDIS was a cool one. And it kind of made for really good tension when it came to the Doctor tackling with the concept of, well, revealing the secrets of the TARDIS, right? Considering they're in the past. And the team getting stranded alone was a cool moment as well. I think it was quite a cool concept, to be honest. This was the first pure historical story. Marco Polo's brilliant, in my opinion. I think it does set the standard for how good the pure historical stories are in the Hartnell years. And the thing is as well, is the Hartnell years, the Hartnell era is the only era of the show that have the magnitude of pure historical stories that it does, and I feel like that is the biggest strength of the Hartnell era, is that he has so many brilliant pure historical period pieces in his era, and I think it's great. There aren't many historicals that I don't enjoy in the Hartnell era. Anyway, I digress. Now we have the Keys of Marinus, very much not a historical story. It's going in C, as you can see there. It's a cool concept, but poor execution for me. I used to really enjoy it, but after watching it on this most recent marathon of the Hartnell years, I can see the cracks forming. The Island of Glass makes for a really cool setting, mind. The Vord are really cool, but they're underused. The quest for each key was pretty cool. There was a moment or an episode where they were battling against plant life that was attacking them, which was a cool moment actually. And there was another bit where they were traversing a city as well. Admittedly, the pacing in this one was all right. The production could have used a kick up here and there. You could tell that they were running low on budget, and so they prioritized other stories over this one. But overall, Keys of Marinus is fine. It's fun. It's nothing to write home about, but it doesn't commit any cardinal sins either. But there you go. That was the Keys of Marinus. Now we move on to the Aztecs. Fucking love the Aztecs. Straight in S tier. One of the best Hartnell stories of all time. Might be my favourite historical second favourite historical story. Taloxal is an amazing villain. He's not a guy with a big laser gun, and he's not a Time Lord or an ethereal being. He's just a dude that wants to commit tyranny. He's a really cool, grounded villain. The setting is absolutely sick. The plot point of Barbara trying to change history by banning the blood sacrifices because she doesn't like them is a brilliant plot point, and it's the first time that Doctor Who has ever tackled the concept of changing time to suit yourself or to suit a greater good, where the Doctor is an objective observer from the sidelines, essentially protesting against, obviously, the famous line, "You can't rewrite history, not one line." That came from this story, and I love that the show is tackling concepts like this. Considering it's a show about time travel, it's bound to happen, but they do it so well, and it's just a really good historical drama. I think it's great. Some great cliffhangers. Yeah, the entire TARDIS team is actually utilised really well in this story as well. I think the Aztecs is fan-fucking-tastic. Right, now we move on to the Sensorites. Not one of my favourites. I'm going to have to stick it low C, below Keys of Marinus. The plot is fun. The pace is good. The plot of them getting marooned on a spaceship early on is cool, frankly. But when they reach the planet, the pacing grinds to a screeching halt. The plot is interesting, at least, and for once, Susan is utilised really well. Using her psychic powers to communicate with the Sensorites was a cool moment, and her kind of contradicting the Doctor at some points. It did make for good drama, but on the whole, it didn't really tick many of the other boxes that I enjoy for a Hartnell story. So yeah, low C tier for me for the Sensorites, personally. But now we move on to the Reign of Terror. I'm going to stick this above? Yeah, probably. I think it does deserve above Unearthly Child. The setting of the French Revolution is brilliant, actually. Once again, another amazing historical story in the Hartnell era. This story also holds my favourite Hartnell performance as well. You can tell that he really enjoyed this script and wanted to give it his all. He also seemed to be having a lot of fun here. Also, my favourite Hartnell costume is on this one, as you can see on the DVD cover. It's an excellent romp. It's a lot of fun. Reign of Terror. I'm quite fond of it. But that does conclude season 1. Now we move on to season 2, starting with Planet of Giants. Now I'm very fond of this one. I'm tempted to slap this one in a low A, but there's a lot in A at the moment. I'll leave it in A and then nudge it down later on if I have to. Planet of Giants, the pacing is excellent. I heard that back in the day, behind the scenes, they were planning for this to be a 4-parter, but my god, does the pacing of this story benefit from being 3 parts, because it's short, snappy, it's potent, there's no wasted space or time to it, it's just straight to the gut punch, does what it needs to do. The plot thread of the pesticide is a cool, intriguing one. The use of the giant insect props is really cool as well, really well done there. And Forrester is a decent villain, in my opinion. I think he's decent enough, does the job. Yeah, I think Planet of Giants is quite a solid one. I think it does hold its own very well. I think it's quite a strong one. But yeah, now we move on to the Dalek Invasion of Earth, which is being slapped straight at the top of S tier, I think. It's nostalgic, one of the first Doctor Who stories for me, once again. The Daleks, I think, have not been scarier, I think, than here. Well, actually, no, we might reach a Dalek story where they're more threatening than this, but they are fucking excellent in this one. Seeing them trundle along Westminster Bridge and climbing out of the Thames, creepy as fuck, man. Also, the existence of the Robo-Men. Like, the way to set a scene is just literally a Robo-Man whose headset is malfunctioned, and all the Robo-Man wants to do once he's regained consciousness is he wants to drown himself. And so he runs into the river. That's a dark fucking way to set your tone for a Doctor Who story. I was blown away. I'd forgotten that scene had happened. as well. Also with the no dumping bodies sign as well. Just, it's so grim and bleak. It's literally a post-apocalyptic story for Doctor Who, which we haven't got many of those in the show's long history. It's a fight for survival. And to top it all off, we have our first companion exit at the end with Susan leaving, right? So yeah, I loved it. I mean, I always have. It's always been one of my favourite Hartnells, and it's a lot of people's favourites for a reason. It's not hard to see why, but I was very impressed. The pacing, considering it's a 6-part as well, not a single dull moment in the whole thing. It's just balls to the wall action. But yeah, there you go. There's Dalek Invasion of Earth. Now we move on to The Rescue, which I am going to put at the top of C, which might surprise some people. Used to not be very fond of this story at all. I still don't love it, hence it being in C tier. At the end of the day, it's 2 parts. It's kind of it's harmless. The introduction of Vicky was well done. The planet Dido is a good setting, and the villain Coquillan has a really cool design, and his motivations are decent, and he's good and threatening. So what more can you want, really? For a 2-part story, you're never really going to reach the stars with it. But it's decent, you know. I don't really dislike it like I used to, so I guess there's that. But now we move on to the Romans, which I am going to put in B tier. I think that the Romans is probably the weakest of the historicals, but that doesn't make it bad. It still landed in B tier, so it just goes to show you the quality of the historical stories. I was quite fond of the time skip at the start of the episode where the TARDIS team are just kind of on holiday, which I did enjoy that, to be honest. The plot point of Ian and Barbara getting mixed up in the slave trade was interesting and captivating, at least. But the humour didn't really do anything for me. I feel like it's ill-placed, especially in a story which is meant to be so bleak in tone. One plus side, though, is the chemistry between Vicky and the Doctor was well done for this one, considering this is the first proper story with Vicky. I was impressed with how well their chemistry was instantly. So there you go. Now we move on to the Web Planet, which shouldn't really be a surprise. It's going in D tier. Sorry. This one, my main note is the script was way too ambitious. Vortis is a cool setting in concept. Same with the Menoptera, the Zarbi, and the Animus. All cool creatures in concept. But I think the production team bit off more than they could chew with this script. When you feel like a story like this would struggle to be made in the modern series of Doctor Who, that's how you know that it was a tricky script to adapt to television, right? Also, it doesn't help that the camera work on this story is absolute tripe at times, and the costumes are ropey at best. But at the end of the day, the story means well, and I recommend, if you want to get the best out of the Web Planet, is to read the Target novelization counterpart called Doctor Who and the Zarbi, which is magnitudes better, frankly. But if I'm basing it on the TV episode alone, then I'm sorry, it has to go D tier. The Crusade, on the other hand, if you know anything about me, it's one of my favourite Hartnell stories. It used to be my #1 favourite for a little while, and I do think it's better than the Aztecs. I really think it's absolutely amazing, and if it was fully existing in the archives, then it would be my #1, I reckon. I think it is just that good. It's brilliant. It jumps straight into action with Barbara getting kidnapped. King Richard is also a really fun character to see. I like that there's no obvious good or bad side to the conflict as well. Most times Doctor Who can be, especially the older show, could be quite black and white in its approach between two sides of a war. But no, this one handles it quite well, that both sides have their motivations. And you can definitely see the motivation for the Crusaders. It's frankly an excellent costume drama, and it is a shame that it's still missing, or at least half of it is missing. And it's unlikely that it will get animated anytime soon, because the amount of costume changes and set changes, you know? It's unfortunate that it might never come back to us. Anyway, that was The Crusade, one of the best episodes for me. Moving on to another one that is just one of the best Hartnell stories, The Space Museum. I went on record saying this is one of my favourite Hartnell stories. At one point it was my #1. Not anymore, I don't think, but I do think it's probably above the Aztecs, maybe? No, I'll put the Aztecs above it. But The Space Museum is frankly excellent. I really love it. The cliffhangers are great. The concept of the museum is really cool. And the constant looming threat that whatever the TARDIS team does, could be leading them closer to becoming museum exhibits, makes for great tension throughout the entire story. The tension between the rebels and the museum is pretty cool too, frankly. But my favourite moments are obviously the interrogation scene and Hartnell popping out of a Dalek casing. It's a lot of fun. I have a soft spot for the Space Museum. No one talks about it. People like to say it's a pile of poo, and they're all wrong. They're all wrong. The episode's great. I really like the Space Museum. But now we move on to the chase, which is easily one of the weakest Dalek stories. I'm gonna stick it top of C. Is it better than the rescue? No, I don't think it is. I'll stick it like here. I think that's a fair spot for it. Yeah, no, the chase is a bit weak. My main gripes with it is that the Daleks are handled absolutely piss poorly. They're treated as a joke. But if you don't take it too seriously, you can have a good time. This one has its redeeming qualities. For one, Ian and Barbara's exit was handled decently enough. It is just a shame that it was this story they had to go out on, as opposed to... I think the Space Museum would have been a better one to bid them farewell, but I don't know. Also, Peter Purvis's performance in this story is fucking amazing. But like I say, it's a bit wacky, it's light-hearted fun, but it is all over the place in direction and tone, which is why it didn't really hit for me. It's a nostalgic one. I've watched this from a young age, but I feel like over the years I've started to spot the cracks, you know, and it does stuff right, but it does a bit more wrong for me. But now we move on to an absolute corker, the Time Meddler, which is one of the best Doctor Who stories. It's a great way to close out season 2. I really do think so. The meddling monk is a brilliant villain through and through. He is one of the main reasons why it is at top of S tier right now. The mystery surrounding him is so cool. Straight from like the first time we see him, where he like seemingly recognizes the TARDIS. Such a cool moment, and instantly like grips you, like, who the fuck is he? You know? He has a cool motivation to like mess with time, and the plot to like have him meddle and change like the outcome of the Battle of Hastings is pretty cool. And it's another case of like Doctor Who expanding its repertoire of stories to do, because before this it was mostly stories set in space, stories like set on a spaceship, and then historical stories, and that's all there was. Whereas this was the first case of, I guess people call it a pseudo-historical story, where it's set in the past, but there's a very big sci-fi component, which is something we see a lot in New Who, right? Where the cast is set in the past, but there is like a sci-fi element that's meddling in what's happening in the past, right? And it happens first here. It's the first time we see something like that with the Time Meddler, and I think it's handled really well. I think it's a really inspired script, to be honest. But now we move on to Galaxy 4. Not my favourite. I used to quite enjoy this story. The way that I've always watched this one is there's a bonus feature on the Aztecs DVD which has a condensed down version of Galaxy 4. And I didn't mind that one, but this full-length version of the story that we have now on animation doesn't really do it for me, I'll be honest. The Dravins are an interesting race, that's for sure, and Marga, okay, does make for an interesting and captivating antagonist. But the Chumleys, they're laughable. They're a laughable, shameless rip-off of the Daleks. But the Rills look cool, I guess. The Rills look cool and creepy. The plot is predictable, and the whole message of don't judge a book by its cover is so fucking overdone. Which means that Galaxy 4 unfortunately is in D tier, if you got, you know, the impression there. Yeah, I'm not over fond of Galaxy 4. It didn't really do anything for me when the full DVD came out. I was quite disappointed, frankly. But now we move on to Mission to the Unknown. Now, if it were up to me, I would have ranked Mission to the Unknown with the rest of Dalek's Master Plan, because it is essentially a prequel, or episode 1. I like to view it as episode 1 of Dalek's Master Plan because it's a nice precursor. But unfortunately, this tier list we got has it on its own, which means it does have to go in C tier. And it's going to go next to the Rescue for the exact same reasons that I put the Rescue where it is. It's short, it's digestible, it's harmless, but it doesn't really reinvent the wheel or anything for Doctor Who, so it does just have to land in there. It's a fun bit of telly that you can just whiz through. It's a short little watch, but doesn't feature the Doctor or TARDIS, so I guess it does earn some points that it is the first Doctor Light story that will later known them as. But yeah, it's nothing to make a song and dance over. It's fine. Right, the Mythmakers. I'm sticking this next to the Romans. It's one of the weaker historical stories, but it's still very strong. It still holds its own. It's mostly missing, which might play a part in my decision to put it a low B behind the Romans. But it is a cool historical story, and it's set around like the Trojan horse story in Troy, right? It's a cool idea to split the TARDIS team across the two sides. The war between the Greeks and the Trojans was also portrayed well enough, but I do think that Vicky's exit was poorly handled. It was a bit too rushed, and it was a bit out of the blue. And similarly, Katarina's intro was a bit out of the blue and rushed for me as well on here. So yeah, but overall Mythmakers is quite decent. It's enjoyable for what it is. But now we move on to the monster, the monolith Doctor Who story, the Daleks Master Plan. Definitely S tier. I don't know where. I do think that it's stronger than the Aztecs. I don't know if it's stronger than the Crusade. I feel like the Crusade is a smaller, more potent dosage of Doctor Who, whereas Daleks Master Plan is a 12-part epic, admittedly, but you can't just set out 6 hours of your day to get through all of Dalek's Master Plan, you know? You've got to break it up. You can't watch it in one. But again, it is epic. The Daleks, once again, are debatably the most ruthless they've ever felt. The death toll in this story is sky high. The stakes are as high as they've ever been. And this one certainly does feel like direct response to how the Daleks were treated in the chase, how they were treated as like a joke, as slapstick comedy, as frankly bumbling idiots. And then the next Dalek story is, like I say, Dalek's Master Plan, where they are as evil and as menacing as they've ever been. It's an epic, gritty story full of shocking deaths. And Marvik Cheng is an absolutely brilliant villain that complements the Daleks in this story perfectly. But going back to like the shocking deaths, this story elevates the show in tension. This is the first time that you feel like the TARDIS team are mortal and they could die in these stories, because we see Katarina and Sarah Kingdom die in just brutal fashion. Like, one of them ages to death and one of them gets jettisoned into space. It is so brutal. My only complaint is that halfway through they sandwich that Christmas special in Feast of Stephen, which is poorly placed, out of context, and a tonal whiplash for me. It breaks up the pace of Dalek's Master Plan and it kind of kills it for me halfway through. If it wasn't for the fact that everything either side of Feast of Stephen is brilliant, then it would go a lot lower, but the fact that Dalek's Master Plan does make up for it by being how epic it is, does mean that it still deserves S-tier spot. An amazing story, one of the best of all time. It is renowned as one of the best Doctor Who stories ever, and there is good reason for it. And it is a fucking crying shame that it is still missing from the archives and hasn't been animated yet, but it would be a gargantuan task to animate the damn thing, so that might be why we haven't seen it come to light yet. But anyway, now we move on to another absolute corker from Hartnell's era, and it's a crying shame this one is also missing from the archives. We have the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve. Is it in S tier? I feel like I'm putting too many of these in S tier. To be honest, I love the Hartnell era, so a lot of these could probably go in S tier, but I'm going to stick it top of A. But the Massacre is amazing. It is fecking excellent. It's a very different story than what we're used to. The mystery with the absence of the Doctor is very captivating, and having the story centre around Stephen was a very, very good choice, because we're seeing everything unfold through his eyes. And for it being such a dark story, having the Doctor not really play a big role in there does add to the horror of it. Most of the pure historical stories do have a comedic element to them that makes them lighter and more digestible for a family audience, but this one sees no comedy. This plays it so straight and deadpan, and like, it's such a bitter story, I feel. Also, last thing, the choice to have Hartnell play the Abbot was so inspired, because it works as a perfect red herring to question whether the Doctor is in fact the Abbot, or whether you can't really trust the Abbot, really. I think it's an excellent story. It's like, you know what, I've talked myself into it. It's going bottom of S tier. I think it is absolutely fucking fantastic. I think the Massacre is criminally underrated, and if it wasn't missing from the archives, it would be a fan favourite. Now, The Ark is the next one. This one, unfortunately, is not one of my favourites. It has a fun setup, but it's not the most groundbreaking Hartnell story. You know what? I felt a bit harsh. I'm going to put it bottom of C. It's a fun synopsis, having Earth survivors brought to a new planet. Dodo's introduction is serviceable, and she at least gets stuff to do in this story. The story, interestingly enough, works as like a tale for two sides. Like part 1 and 2 are a very separate story from part 3 and 4, and they kind of do work as like a yin and yang as to what they're trying to say. It's quite a politically charged story when it comes to the monoids versus the humans, you know. I feel like it's interestingly handled, and I think I get what they're trying to do here, and I can appreciate it at least, but overall it's not a very remarkable story, to be honest, in the grand scheme of things. Right, now we have the Celestial Toymaker. It's not an S tier for me. Obviously it's missing once again, so you kind of have to take everything I say here with a grain of salt, because my opinion will be biased against it, because there's very little visual element that I can comment on here. It does suffer from being a very visual story. The Toymaker, I mean, everyone's sung his praises recently thanks to the, you know, him being brought back through Neil Patrick Harris and RTD. But the Toymaker is a brilliant villain, and he was in this story as well. The idea to have his trials being made up of children's games is really fun, actually, to experience. But with how much the Toymaker is said to do, he actually doesn't do a whole lot in the story, which might be why it's slightly underwhelming for me, because I was expecting more from him. Granted, I've only watched the Celestial Toymaker, I think, 3 times now. The most recent one was probably the most I've enjoyed, you know, going through it, just because I had the newfound context of seeing the Toymaker brought back in the giggle. So overall, it's a fun one. I think it's stronger than the Daleks. I'll stick it top of A. I feel like it deserves that at least. But like I say, if it wasn't missing from the archives, I'm sure it will probably land a bit higher. But yeah, as it stands, it doesn't quite squeak into S tier for me. The Gunfighters. Oh boy. This one has a very interesting surrounding on the internet, doesn't it? A lot of people shit on this one for some reason, and I've never understood why. I'm gonna do it. Boom. Another S tier Hartnell story. Fucking, the Hartnell era is banging, you know? I fucking love the Gunfighters, you know? I think it is better than the Massacre. Is it better than the Space Museum? I don't know. I don't think it is. Now, maybe it is, actually. No, I'll leave it where it is. I don't want to get too greedy. Even though looking at how many are in S tier right now, fucking hell. I have a lot of fun with the Gunfighters. Every single time I watch it, I find less things that annoy me. The Western setting, mwah, pure chef's kiss. I love it. The full extended cast of it as well is so fun to watch. I've always found the musical element of this story quite fun as well, even though that's a heavily critiqued note from this story. And the plot point of the Doctor being mistaken for Doc Holliday is interesting. Overall, the Gunfighters is overhated, personally. I think I find it a lot of fun. I really do. Right, now that we've got Gunfighters out of the way, now we move on to the Savages. Not very much to note on this one. We get Stephen's exit here, which is fine. The dark secret of the City of the Elders was a cool plot thread, actually. And I guess the TARDIS team is utilised fairly well, I guess. Overall, I think the Savages are... I think it's a bit of a forgettable one for me. I don't know. It doesn't deserve D, though, because the D ones are the ones that I actively didn't enjoy watching very much. I'll put it behind the Ark. I feel like that's a fair spot. But yeah, there you go. There was the Savages. Right, now we move on to the War Machines, one that I've gone on record in the past and stated that I haven't enjoyed very much. But I'm very pleased to report that on this watch, I very much enjoyed it. That's happened a lot with a few of these Hartnell stories in this most recent marathon of mine. The story of the artificial intelligence taking over humanity, enough said, it's ahead of its time, story-wise. This one is also the first modern-day invasion story of Doctor Who, I guess. The story of the post office tower being like the centerpiece of the story was quite fun as well. The War Machines are a cool design, but don't really live up to the Daleks, unfortunately for me. My only complaint really is Dodo's exit was quite sudden and poorly handled. But luckily, Ben and Polly's entrance was extremely well handled. I think that they're utilised in this story extremely well. Overall, War Machines, I think, is going to earn itself an A tier. I'll put it above Planet of Giants, but behind Marco Polo. Yeah, that seems fair. Right, now we move on to the Smugglers. Okay, 17th century pirates. Interesting backdrop for the story, for sure. I think this one mostly suffers from being sandwiched between two pretty strong ones. Also, it suffers from it being missing as well. The plot of the hunt for Henry Avery's treasure made for an interesting TV, but overall there's not really much to write home on here, so I might also have to stick this in a low C. You know what, I did enjoy it more than the Keys of Marinus, so I'll give it that. Actually, you know what? It does better than the Chase. There you go. But yeah, now we've moved on to the final Hartnell story, the 10th Planet, at long last. Cybermen are brilliant, the spookiest I think they've ever been. Seeing them trudge through the snow near the South Pole, absolutely excellent visuals, I feel. The design of the Cybermen I've obviously praised to high hell. The concept of Mondas and the Cybermen is really well explored in this story as well. How the Cybermen have had to evolve and augment themselves with cybotic parts, you know, to make them survive the harsh climate of Mondas. Overall, the pacing on this one is a bit skew-whiff though, on rewatch. Still fun though, the setting's great, performances are mostly great. The absence of Hartnell is very noticeable though. He does have some great moments, mind, but overall, the main notable thing that this story gets all the praise for is the first regeneration story, you know? But overall, I feel like this one gets a smidge too much praise. I'm not docking at any points or anything, but I don't know if I'd give it more than a B, personally. Granted, I do think that it's the strongest of the B tier, but I don't think I can put it up there with stuff like the Daleks or Celestial Toymaker or Marco Polo. It is a fun story, but it isn't like the greatest Hartnell story like some people claim it to be. But yeah, it's still fun though. But there you go. Is there any micromanaging that I do on this tier list? I think Time Meddler is probably the strongest Hartnell. I'm happy with that. Invasion Earth is probably second. Oh, go on then. I'll put Master Plan above Crusade. I'm not going to like it though. Yeah, Crusade over Aztecs. Space Museum over Aztecs too, I reckon. Gunfighters is fine where it is. Massacre is probably fine where it is. Bottom of S. I think Celestial Toymaker is fair to be at top of A. Daleks, yeah. Oh, you know what? I'll put Marco Polo above the Daleks. I think Marco Polo deserves to be higher up. B tier looks good. C tier, yeah, that looks fine. And then D tier again. I might put Web Planet bottom of D. But there you go. That has been me ranking all of the First Doctor's stories. On balance, you can see I'm a massive fan of the Hartnell era because nearly half of his episodes are in S tier by the looks of it. But I thoroughly enjoyed binging his episodes, actually. It was an absolute joy to blitz through his era the way that I did. And I found a new appreciation for stories like the Massacre and the War Machines, you know? So let me know what you think of my ranking, whether I'm based or whether I'm a bitch boy with some really shit opinions. Let me know in the comments, and let me know what your top 10 Hartnell stories. You can rank all 29 if you want in the comments, but yeah, that's it. I'll wrap it up here. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.